How's it going, Juliana?
It's going good. Technical difficulty is significantly less than last time, but still present.
Yeah, hopefully I'm here with my more authentic voice today. Maybe it sounds a little different since we're recording remotely instead of over the internet.
It actually sounds better even in my headphones from like through Discord. It even sounds fine.
Huh. Might be the pop filter I've got here. Hopefully it's helping a little bit. My P's don't pop anymore.
It definitely sounds better.
So what's in the back pocket today, Juliana?
Today, we're going to give a little update on some of the topics we discussed in episode 1, like Kyle Rittenhouse and the Kenosha protests and the USPS and Postmaster DeJoy. Then we're going to get a little bit into climate change and the raging wildfires that are affecting the West Coast right now, the Julian Assange trial, Elon Musk's Neuralink, and then we will finish it off like we do every episode with some good news in our Pocket Full of Sunshine segment.
I'm Kobe,
And I'm Juliana.
and let's jump in.
All right, so on episode 1, we discussed Postmaster General Louis DeJoy and his what some consider blatant attacks on the post office and specifically mail-in voting. And some things that came out of his congressional hearing where he completely denied any wrongdoing. He agreed to halt removals of, I believe, sorting machines and then those iconic blue boxes that we all know on the sides of the street for at least 90 days so that there's no association with it affecting the election. And he also suspended the other cost-cutting initiatives until after the election as well. Something new, though, that has come up is that allegedly some of his former employees came out and said that they were encouraged to donate to the Trump campaign and that he would repay them or reimburse them with bonuses. Now, that is obviously completely illegal, and even he said so in his hearing. But I guess we will have to update you on our next episode to find out what happens there.
Yeah, and I know that in the hearing itself, he was asked, quote, did you pay back several of your top executives for contributing to Trump's campaign by bonusing or rewarding them? He was asked that by Representative Jim Cooper, a Democrat from Tennessee. And he responded by saying, quote, that's an outrageous claim, sir, and I resent it, end quote. But one of the interesting things that the Washington Post pointed out was that even though he denied paying back his employees for donations to the Trump campaign in 2016, the more recent reporting actually talks a lot about other Republicans that he may have reimbursed them for donating to. So I have a quote here from the article I was reading. Quote, 5 people who worked for DeJoy's former business, New Breed Logistics, say they were urged by DeJoy's aides or by the chief executive himself to write checks and attend fundraisers at his 15,000 square foot gated mansion besides a Greensboro, North Carolina country club. There, events for Republicans running for the White House and Congress routinely fetched 100,000 or more piece, end quote. And so basically what he's accused of doing is him and a bunch of his employees would donate the same amount of money to a congressional candidate, and then he would reimburse them for that donation, which is illegal. But then, so somebody else associated with Trump that got in trouble for something kind of similar to that, Dinesh D'Souza, I don't know if you've heard of him, prominent conservative commentator, I guess you can call him. But in 2014, he pleaded guilty to a scheme where he paid his assistant and his mistress for donations to a Senate campaign. So the same sort of thing where he had other people donate to a candidate and then he reimbursed them. I think the reason why that's illegal is because, each person is limited to, I think, $2,700 that they're allowed to donate to a campaign. And so if you're paying other people to donate to the campaign, you're basically going over that limit.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see if anything comes out of it, because I'm seeing in the article it talked about how some of these violations might be past the statute of limitations. So even if he technically did these things, he might not actually be able to get charged for it. But it'll be interesting to see how it develops. So an update on Jacob Blake's condition. He was the Kenosha man who was shot 7 times in the back while he was getting into his car. So luckily, he did survive. He is alive still. It's still unclear whether he'll be able to walk or not. He might be permanently paralyzed, but they don't know exactly yet. And so he's had his first interview the other day, and he didn't say very much, but I just wanted to pull two quotes in particular out of that. The first one, quote, "Every 24 hours, it's pain. It's nothing but pain. It hurts to breathe. It hurts to sleep. It hurts to move from side to side. It hurts to eat," end quote. So that just kind of gives you a look into his recovery and just the pain that he's going through after that police shooting. But then another quote, "Your life, and not only just your life, your legs, something that you need to move around and move forward in life, could be taken from you like this, man." And, he's just expressing his shock that, in the matter of a day, he just completely lost his ability to walk forever. So that's just really sad. Another update is there's been no charges for the officers that shot him yet. And he's actually facing sexual assault charges himself, and he pleaded not guilty to that recently. But so it'll be interesting to see where he recovers and whether he'll actually be involved in the Black Lives Matter movement going forward. That still remains to be seen.
So I just want to clarify. You said Jacob Blake is currently facing sexual assault charges?
He is, yeah. That's actually why they were detaining him in the first place.
Right, okay.
But it's not... But, and all that stuff isn't really relevant to him getting shot 7 times
absolutely.
in the back, right? Because that's not a punishment for... I mean, even if he did the sexual assault and how terrible that is, in this other case, he is still the victim of a police shooting for, unjustified, I would say. But in other news, kind of related to that, so Kyle Rittenhouse, he was the 17-year-old kid who showed up to the protests after this shooting to kind of, join the militias that were trying to protect businesses. And so he has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree homicide and several other felonies. I think one of them is the fact that he was possessing an assault rifle illegally in the state of Wisconsin. He actually crossed state lines in order to go there. But the thing that shocked me the most about how things have developed there is just the amount of right-wing media that have come out in support of Kyle Rittenhouse. It's really disgusting.
It's gross.
So I have a quote here from Tucker Carlson. He actually has the most popular cable TV show in America, shockingly, at the moment, cable news. And so he said, quote, "How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would? Everyone can see what was happening in Kenosha. It was getting crazier by the hour." And that's not even the craziest defense. I think that's maybe the most prominent person that's defended Kyle Rittenhouse. But we have a quote here from Republican Congressman Thomas Macy from Kentucky, where he said that he didn't think that Kyle Rittenhouse should be charged and that he actually exercised incredible restraint because he didn't empty his magazine into the entire crowd.
I think I saw that, and he was like, and they said like, oh, he wasn't shooting indiscriminately. He only shot the people who were, quote, attacking him.
And it's crazy because so many people, and I think I talked about this a little bit in the first episode, how people only saw that one video without the context of understanding that he just shot somebody in the head, and that's why everybody's trying to attack him, quote unquote.
Right, and they're also attacking him with a skateboard. Like, nobody that was running after him had a weapon nearly as lethal as he did. And they were trying to get that weapon out of his hands to protect other people. It's so frustrating that it's like, it's self-defense. He ended 2 people's lives who were attempting to save more lives. It just, there's just, I can't. This story pisses me off so much, and I just have a very, I don't know, like an emotional reaction to it that it makes me so angry.
And it's crazy to think, if he didn't flee in the first place, if he had stayed after he shot the first person in the head and, apologized, tried to give him first aid, whatever it is, the next 2 people who got shot, that wouldn't have had to happen if he had just stayed and turned himself in initially.
Or if he didn't, go fucking be a vigilante, which is illegal. You're not allowed to just go decide that you're now law enforcement, and it's up to you to go, again, protect property, as in cars, right? Wasn't that he shot somebody who was, smashing cars? Yeah, sure, that sucks. All this car dealership lost all this money. Well, that person lost their life, the punishment does not fit the crime, and it's oh god.
Oh yeah, no, vandalism doesn't fit. You don't get killed for vandalism. You don't get killed for looting. You don't get killed for any of the stuff that these people defending these militias out there are saying. But I think one of the craziest developments in that, and so I thought this was like, fake viral news when I first read it. I just saw a tweet and I was like, oh, that sounds believable, but I don't know if it's actually true. And then I looked it up today and there was a Snopes.com article about it, and I was like, oh, it's probably debunked. Like, it's probably not true. But it was true, and I'll get into what it is here. So one of the lawyers representing Kyle Rittenhouse tweeted out, quote, Kyle Rittenhouse will go down in American history alongside that brave, unknown patriot at Lexington Green who fired the shot heard round the world on April 19th, 1775. A second American revolution against tyranny has begun. #fightback. I mean, wow. That's like him literally, his lawyer's literally saying that his client started a war, is what he's saying here.
But he's on the good side.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this, I'm not going to yell because this mic is sensitive, but that just makes me want to scream at the top of my lungs. Like, oh my God. And obviously there's that whole other angle about the story where it's like a white man or a white boy with a weapon versus what police do to a black man or boy with a weapon. Like, that's a whole other angle of the story. But like, even if you just ignore that for right now and look at just what happened, what this kid did, like, he murdered. He's a murderer. He wasn't defending himself when he shot the first person. Like, he's still a murderer.
And to go back to that context that we just left aside, I mean, this is like the perfect case study of what you were just talking about, how police deal with a white man, how police deal with a black man. Jacob Blake was shot because he was getting in his car that they said had a knife in the car.
Or
they shot him 7 times in the back.
Yeah,
they thought it. I think it did. I think they did find a knife, but there's no indication at all that he was like reaching for it.
But either way, whether they knew that or not, it was really fucking clear that Kyle Rittenhouse had a weapon. Like, that's not something that could have been argued. Like, it's bizarre.
And if you see after he shot those people in the video, you see him walk up to the armored police vehicle with his hands raised in the air. He thinks that he's about to get arrested. He pretty much is trying to turn himself in, and they ignored him. They were just like, "Please move out of the road. Please get out of the way." If a black man with an AR-15 in his hands walked up to police after shots were just fired, that they would have shot at him or immediately detained him. They wouldn't have just let him flee back to his home state.
And the thing is, like, I'm pretty sure there's video, and you can hear the audio of like when those armored vehicles start pulling in after they hear the gunshots. They literally ask him as he's walking towards them. He goes, injured people up ahead. Like, the cops are asking him because, of course, it couldn't have been him. Of course, it couldn't have been this white kid with a fucking giant-ass gun. No, he wasn't the one who injured all those people after hearing all those gunshots. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, are you kidding? Like, you don't even think to possibly, like, at least detain and question this person who is going away from a scene where gunshots were heard holding a gun. Like, like, where's the logic?
I mean, I guess the logic is in the racism of, a white man, no matter what he does, always gets the benefit of the doubt from white police officers, whereas a black man, no matter what he does, is viewed as a criminal thug who is a potential threat. No matter what. They're always trying to de-escalate with a white person, but when it's a black person, that's not even an option in their heads.
Right, like, black people have to prove they're innocent, white people have to prove they're guilty. Like, that's just not how the world's supposed to work, but that is currently what we are dealing with in the United States.
And that's what the Black Lives Matter movement's fighting for, to get that to change. So, Juliana, you live out in Seattle. Tell us about the wildfires that are happening out on the West Coast.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of you listening have probably seen those kind of what I assume will become iconic photos of this incident out of Oregon. The entire sky and like landscape just completely lit up orange, like super low visibility just because of the dust and everything else. And it kind of has been compared to what people would assume life would be like on Mars.
Yeah.
And although that's kind of a funny little joke, like, this is not a laughing matter in any sense whatsoever. I live in Seattle, and even today and yesterday, we've had like air quality advisories. Even me just driving up the highway. And like generally August in Seattle is like no clouds. The sky is bright blue. There's absolutely like nothing in the way. And like even just, I want to say like half a mile to a mile in front of me starts to get hazy, which is kind of crazy, which as someone who's from the East Coast now living on the West Coast, that's not something I've ever been used to.
No, definitely not. I mean, I've lived on the East Coast my whole life, and I can't even imagine waking up and looking in the sky and it's just a hazy, yellowish, even orange. I mean, you in Seattle don't even see it as bad as it is in, I think, Salem, Oregon, where it's literally pitch orange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. No, it's really not that bad in Seattle just because most of the fires are in the eastern part of the state and Seattle is very much west. But like still, like it's still, we're getting it from Oregon, we're getting it from eastern Washington, maybe even some more from NorCal, just kind of all floating up. And like where the Puget, the way, I don't know, the way that like Puget Sound works, everything just kind of starts to swirl in the Puget Sound and just kind of blanket the area.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, he put out an interesting tweet today with a little statistics about the fires in California. So in 2019, California had 4,927 fires and 118,000 acres were burned. Sounds like a lot, right? But when we look at California in 2020, 2020 is not even over yet. They've had 7,606 fires and 2.3 million acres burned. So that's about 20 times more acres burned this year than last year, and this year's not even over.
And I was going to say, I believe there's about another month left of like the so-called fire season. And since you kind of shared what that governor said, I want to share Jay Inslee, who's the governor of Washington, said that I'm not sure which day it was, but whatever day that the most of the damage was done, it was more damage in one day than in a typical year for Washington State. There was more acres burned in that one day than also 12 of the last fire seasons in Washington, which is like just like think about those numbers. Like I know when you're listening and you're just hearing someone like spit out some stats to you, just like think about it.
Yeah,
one day compared to 12 of the last entire fire season, which I believe are like 40 to 90 days long in the state.
That really is crazy. Wow.
It's yeah.
And a little funny, a funny kind of side note, funny not funny. More houses have been burnt down in the fires in California than all of the Black Lives Matter, uprisings and riots combined. But, the right-wingers aren't talking at all about the fires yet.
Right. And also, I want to call out the media, like the media as a whole in general, because not just like left-wing, right-wing, whatever. I live in Washington State and I was unaware. And I like follow news I go trending Twitter, trending in Washington, like all of those things. And I didn't even know that there was fires in Washington going on. I just assumed that it was all coming up from Oregon and California. Like, I don't know if that's just me being like dumb and not looking at the right things, but like, I don't know how I did not know that Eastern Washington was also on fire. And I feel like, I don't know if it's just because the media doesn't like to talk about climate change or there's just more important political things going on and like Trump things get more clicks and stuff like that. But like, again, I live here and I was unaware that there were fires going on in my state.
It definitely fits a broader trend just in general of the media under-reporting on the climate problem. I mean, I remember in a lot of the presidential primary debates, they didn't ask one question about climate change, which is like one of the most important issues politically facing the entire world. It's not even political, facing all of life on Earth.
Yeah.
And they don't even ask one question in some of these debates. And, you live in Washington and you don't hear about a major, natural disaster impacting your state. I mean, this is the issue. I mean, climate change is going to be, I think I've seen somebody tweet about it in a really interesting way, that this is going to be the best year going forward. You know what I mean? Like, this year sounds really bad to us right now in hindsight, looking back at what we've experienced so far. But as years go on, the toll that we're seeing in 2020 will be nothing compared to the damage that we're going to see in 2025, 2030, and every year going forward as the crisis gets worse.
Yeah. And I feel like some people are kind of like, they don't put two and two together. It's just like, oh, it's a particularly dry season. I wouldn't say people, but I would say people who are, I guess, climate change deniers.
Yeah.
don't understand how the two are connected. Like, fires happen when shit is dry and hot. Climate change makes things drier and hotter. Like, it's just... And there's, like... And for people who, like, deny that climate change exists, you can go ahead, have your opinion on whether humans contribute to it or not. Ignore the science. Fine, whatever. But, like, these things are still happening, and that means we still need to do something about it. Like, Death Valley in California recorded its hottest temperature since 1913. It was 130 degrees. And in the Arctic Circle, I believe it was a small town in Siberia, hit like 100 degrees in the Arctic Circle. Like, if you don't see a problem with that, like, I don't know. Like,
and the thing is, even if, let's just go with their argument, which is totally ridiculous, but let's just go with their argument, that it has nothing to do with carbon emissions. So let's say we go through all of this process. The UN, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2018, they said, quote, staying at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the Paris Climate Agreement goal, requires slashing global greenhouse gas emissions 45% below 2010 levels by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. So let's just go with the climate deniers' argument. We cut emissions all the way to net zero by 2050, and it doesn't stop climate change from continuing. I mean, but fossil fuel emissions are bad for air quality. Air pollution causes public health problems. Extracting these resources from the ground causes all sorts of environmental problems. So even if we're wrong about the emissions thing, which all scientists say we're not, but even if we were, there would still be tons of benefits to doing this anyway, to cutting emissions anyway, just in case.
Right. And it's like, it's not, I don't know. I said this to you earlier before we started recording, but it's like, let's say you want to build a house on a fault line, and even though whatever science, let's say 1,000% there's going to be a massive earthquake where you live in 3 years. And you go, oh, well, that's just like nature. It just happens naturally. Like, would you still choose to live there? Would you not prepare to save yourself from all of that damage that is going to happen? Or that could potentially happen? Like, what's the worst case scenario if you prepare for something and then it doesn't happen? Oh, well, good for you. You prepared just in case. Like, I don't get the resistance to, I guess, like, progressing forward with science. Like, it's just science. Like,
And so I'll connect this a little bit now to, like, the politics of it. And so we'll go into the presidential politics of it for a little bit, and then I'll kind of connect it to the Green New Deal and other issues. But, so Trump, I mean, we don't even have to go into it very much. He called climate change a hoax made by the Chinese. He wants to increase carbon emissions. He wants to use clean coal, he says, which is not clean at all. But so that's where he is. He is completely anti-environment in every single way without fail. And Joe Biden is a little better in the sense that at least he wants to rejoin the Paris Agreement that Trump pulled us out of. We're the only country in the world not part of the Paris Agreement. Even North Korea and Syria and other countries are in the Paris Agreement. But so at least Joe...
I don't know why that wasn't a bigger deal when that happened. Like, that was crazy.
I mean, I just think it has to do in general with the downplaying of the climate issue by the media. But, so he wants to rejoin the Paris Agreement, which is good. So the goal of the Paris Agreement is to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But the only problem that some people have is that, Joe Biden talks a good talk, but will he walk the walk? And so he does have a lot of fossil fuel lobbyists who are kind of involved in this campaign. He gets campaign donations from fossil fuel companies. And so on one hand, you might say, well, yeah, but maybe those companies are changing. And, maybe to a certain degree, it could be true. But it also, I think, has to do with, Joe Biden has publicly said that he won't stop fracking at all, hydraulic fracking, which is how they get natural gas. So just a little context on that. Natural gas, it burns less emissions than oil. Or than coal. And so that's why they're trying to transition us more and more onto natural gas. The only problem is to actually get it out of the ground. They have to, inject a bunch of water into the ground, which causes the earth to fracture. That's why it's called fracking. And it often leads to pollution into waterways, pollution into drinking water sometimes, and earthquakes happen a lot near these fracking rigs. And so, while it's good that Joe Biden wants to rejoin the Paris Agreement, and says he wants to reach net zero by 2050, People worry that if you keep doing fracking, and if he doesn't actually put into place any concrete plans to actually get us to net zero by 2050, because, Obama joined the Paris Climate Agreement when he was president, but there were no mechanisms put in place to make sure that we actually fulfill our obligations for the climate agreement. So it'll be interesting to see if Joe Biden actually puts forward concrete plans to actually reach that net zero instead of just talking about it.
Right, and I just wanted to add one little thing about fracking. The water that they use for fracking is, like, either majority or, I believe, completely all fresh water. So, like, I don't feel like people understand that, like, we are actually, like, our fresh water supply is diminishing just, like, as time goes on, as there's more people, as more things become polluted. Like, it's a huge use. What is this? According to ecowatch.com, I'm not gonna lie, don't know how credible. 5 million gallons of fresh water used to frack just one well. Like, that's, like, I'm a vegetarian for a lot of reasons, and specifically one of them is how much fresh water is used for, like, the meat industry and things like that. Yeah. Like, it's just, like, don't. It's, like, these things that seem so simple and, like, straightforward to me in my brain. It's like, yes, let's use a diminishing resource to further harm the earth. Yep, makes total sense. Like, what? I
mean, the problem is they just think of it in the short term of our top priority is to cut carbon emissions. Natural gas cuts carbon emissions. Thus, the phrase they use for natural gas is they call it a transition fuel. So they all admit that they don't want to do this long term because it's really bad for the environment. But if we want to cut emissions in time, this is what we need to do. Now, a lot of people push back on that by saying, well, if you take away subsidies away from fossil fuel companies and put it towards green energy, renewable energy, you don't need to use natural gas as a transition fuel. So a lot of people worry that the reason why fossil fuel interests are relatively friendly to Biden is because he's letting them continue fracking, despite all of the evidence about how bad it is still. And to kind of connect one last thing before we wrap the segment up. So the Green New Deal. A lot of people have concerns, a lot of moderates have concerns about the Green New Deal because, we need to cut carbon emissions. Why are you throwing in things about a job guarantee? Why are you throwing in things about racism into a bill that's supposed to be just an environmental bill? And, on face value, I can understand why they feel that way. Why are we throwing all these things into one bill? But the counter-argument that you hear from people like AOC, and I find it really convincing, is that, if we only cut carbon emissions, but we don't focus on the human impact that we're going to see from environmental problems, I mean, you're only solving a small fraction of the problem, because it's people of color who are going to face the problems of climate change first and worst. So they're going to get, and in general, poverty, it typically tends to be people of color who face poverty more than other people. And it's people who live in poverty who will face these problems the worst because, if your house burns down in California and you're too poor to afford another one, you're screwed. If you're an island nation in the Pacific and the waters raise and your island disappears, you're a climate refugee. Where are you going to go to? And so the whole idea with actually guaranteeing people a job, it'd be in green energy because that's where we're moving towards. And especially it would focus on getting coal workers and other fossil fuel workers into those industries. But so if we can give people a job and pull people out of poverty and focus on what we're going to do with climate refugees now, if we can start talking about those issues now, we won't be cleaning up the mess after the fact later, which is, unfortunately, because Biden hasn't publicly come out in support of the Green New Deal. His plan's good with carbon emissions, but it's missing those other elements.
Yeah, I think people really need to focus on that climate change doesn't only, yes, obviously it affects the earth, and I feel like some people don't put together, oh yeah, I live on earth. When it's not directly affecting you, it's not something that I guess a lot of people pay attention to, at least in the States. I know that's a big problem that we face, just people don't care about things that don't directly affect them, but it's if we wait any longer, it'll be too late. And something I just wanted to add, if any of you are interested in learning a little bit more about how climate change affects wildfires and things like that, there was a great TED Talk on YouTube that I watched by Paul Hasberg, who is a scientist. So if you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to check that out.
and I will check it out with everybody else.
All right, Kobe, since you are a little bit more versed in this than I am, would you like to tell us about what's going on with Julian Assange?
Yeah, so this week, Julian Assange is facing an extradition trial in England. So, for a little bit of context, Julian Assange is the founder of WikiLeaks. Most people have probably heard of WikiLeaks. They release documents that are given to them by sources, usually whistleblowers. They release documents showing, stuff that the governments around the world are doing. And so, a few years ago, he was facing rape allegations in Sweden. Those charges have since been dropped. But he ended up going to the Ecuadorian embassy in England to kind of flee those charges, because his fear was he was willing to talk about those charges, but he was scared that they were going to use those charges to extradite him to the United States to face charges, relating to WikiLeaks. And so he was in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, a really long time. He was confined to one room in the embassy.
Yeah, literally not leaving a building for...
No, not at all. I mean that must be, mentally taxing in and of itself. But
we're all getting used to it now.
Yeah, now we all are. But so then when the charges in Sweden got dropped, they thought, well, maybe there's a possibility that he'll be allowed to leave the embassy and then he can go flee to another country. But then the UK had charged him for fleeing the charges in Sweden. But once the charges in Sweden got dropped, the UK refused to drop their charges because they said that, well, he still, didn't go back to Sweden. So he still he still violated our law. And so he's been in prison, in the Belmarsh prison, which is a crazy high security prison where they keep murderers and rapists and all sorts of other people. But he's been in that prison for about a year. And so he's actually probably served the amount of time that he was facing for those charges. But then, about a year ago, the Trump administration unsealed some indictments for Assange. So a little context on that. A sealed indictment is something that they had a charge for him, but they just hadn't made it public yet. So after these other charges got dropped, they made these U.S. government charges public. There's 18 different charges. I won't be able to get into all of them here. But one of them is espionage. And the core one that they're trying to get him on is conspiring to hack government computers, and I'll give a little more context on that. But he's facing up to 175 years in prison if he gets found guilty on all of these charges, which to me is crazy because, you don't even see murderers. You don't see killer cops go to jail for that long.
Yeah.
But, so the core charge they're trying to get him on, the conspiring to hack government computers. So this is related to the Iraq war logs. They released these in about 2010. And so it was a bunch of documents showing war crimes that the U.S. was committing in the Iraq war. And we can detail some of those later on. But in general, they're claiming that he helped Chelsea Manning crack some codes on a government computer so that she could be anonymous in getting the documents and then leaking them. So basically, they claim that Julian Assange helped her hide her identity so that she could do it. And it was Bradley Manning at the time. She has had a transgender surgery since then. And what's so troubling about all of the charges, but that one also, is that if Julian Assange is extradited to the U.S. and then he faces trial here, if he's found guilty, it could set a precedent where journalists are not really allowed to work with whistleblowers like he did here. So it is pretty common for journalists to help their sources remain anonymous in doing what they do. And so, for example, Ken Klippenstein is one of my favorite journalists, I think at The Nation. He regularly asks Department of Homeland Security officials to reach out to him through an app called Signal. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's an app that encrypts your messages so that they can't be intercepted. But so that's just him in a different sense, helping hide the identities of his sources. But so if Julian Assange is found guilty and sent to prison for all these charges, outlets like CNN, Washington Post, The Guardian, and others, it'll be much harder for them to release classified information about government officials that are, is given to them by whistleblowers, because they could potentially get in trouble for the publication of these documents.
Right. And from what I know, you obviously know significantly more than me in terms of this situation, but just like in general, as somebody who also studied journalism in college, like this just the biggest, I think, question going on here is like what you said, like this could set a precedent. Like, is this considered journalism or is this considered espionage, and where's the line? And like you said, like this could really affect the kind of the future of journalism, which is crazy to think about because he exposed bad things. Yes, he did an illegal thing to get there. So, but like where do you draw the line?
Well, and that's the thing is that, I mean, and I don't know the exact details of him helping crack a password and how exactly that might be a crime or not. I don't know the exact detail on that. But in general, that's what the U.S. government's trying to claim, is that he's not a journalist. He is a bad actor. He's a criminal. And so he's thus not protected. So they're trying to avoid setting that precedent, is what they're trying to do.
Yeah, the U.S.'s main argument is like espionage and crime against national security, and like that's what they're going with. Like that's their main like fighting point.
But the problem would be, I mean, Julian Assange has won over 15 different international awards for journalism for the work that he's done with WikiLeaks. And the New York Times, who actually worked with him to release these exact Iraq war documents, so the New York Times, The Guardian, and Der Spiegel, a German outlet, they all worked with him to release these documents that he's being charged for. And the New York Times actually won an award, a journalism award, for their coverage of these Iraq war logs that he released. And so that's where it gets particularly troubling, is that if he gets in trouble for his involvement with that, what's going to stop them in the future from going after any outlet, whether it be the New York Times or whether it be, you know, a small independent journalist? What will stop them from going after anybody who works with whistleblowers? And that's the problem.
Right, like it's almost being considered like an attack on free press.
And that's actually why the Obama administration didn't bring these charges forward. So a little more context. Obama actually granted Chelsea Manning clemency at the end of his presidency. So clemency doesn't wipe away the charge forever. It just kind of released Chelsea from prison. Trump actually sent Chelsea Manning back to prison because Trump tried to interview Chelsea Manning about Julian Assange. Chelsea Manning refused to talk, claiming it was double jeopardy. Got sent back to prison for a few more years. I think she's finally free again. But so in general, Obama didn't bring these charges forward because he worried that it would set a precedent against all journalists. Of course, Trump doesn't necessarily care about that. And so a little more, so the UN had a special rapporteur on torture that actually talked a little bit about this case, I think a year ago. And they said, quote, "My most urgent concern is that in the United States, Mr. Assange would be exposed to a real risk of serious violations of his human rights, including his freedom of expression, his right to a fair trial, and the prohibition of torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment." And so I think the reason why that special reporter had that concern is that Chelsea Manning, the one who actually whistleblew these documents, Chelsea Manning was put in solitary confinement in a top high security military prison for months. So Chelsea Manning actually tried to kill herself in prison and was punished with even more solitary confinement, which anybody who knows suicidal ideation, you know, if you're suicidal, being put in solitary confinement makes it way worse. So that's a terrible punishment for that. So, of course, Julian Assange and the UN in general fear that Assange will face very similar punishments. And facing 175 years in prison makes it seem relatively likely that he will face those.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this or not, but I guess I'm just kind of asking, like, why are they putting these types of people who are nonviolent? Like, yes, they're technically in the eyes of, like, the U.S. and the law, like, they're a threat against security, but they're not violent. So, like, why are they in these, like, maximum security prisons?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely.
Do you have any idea?
I mean, that's where I think we'd be getting into speculation. I mean, because
okay,
I'll try to go by their argument, and then I'll try to go by what I think. So I'm assuming their argument would be, since what he did threatened U.S. national security, and it's almost like treason is in their eyes how bad what they both did was. That's one of the highest crimes you can possibly commit, and so you get, you know, the harshest military punishment that you can get. That's how I think their side of it looks at it. Now, to me, I mean, it's kind of making an example out of Julian Assange so that nobody else will do what he did. You know, if you make the punishment for whistleblowing 50 years in a military prison in solitary confinement, if you make the punishment for publishing whistleblown information, if you make that punishment 175 years in prison, it's going to scare anybody from ever doing something similar in the future. And that's why a lot of people think this has to do with press freedom.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And
so, go ahead.
You're right. It's like, it's just like a really hard thing. Because like personally, my opinion, I think what it's like the overall greater good kind of thing. Like, you know what? Never mind. I don't even have an example. Just keep going, Kobe.
How so? When you say the greater good, are you thinking of it in sense of like, what he did was for the greater good, or the punishments for the greater good? Dive into that a little.
I feel like from a little bit of what I've watched and the language surrounding him, and like even people who are supporting him, it's like, yes, he technically did something wrong, did something illegal, but it was in order to kind of open the eyes of the American people. And it's like, well, where we all, it's like, obviously the government, the military, there's tons of things that the American people don't know. Like, that's just like how it works. But I don't like, what did it hurt and what did it help? I guess I feel like needs to be looked at in order to consider what his punishment, if any, should be. It needs to, like, the outcome, not just the fact that he did it, because again, it's a whistleblowing thing. It's journalism, not necessarily like who's he spying for if it's espionage, you know what I mean? Like
the worst. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I feel like he was doing it. He just tries to shed light on things. And again, this feels like wholeheartedly like I'm like a Julian Assange fan, but no, I just believe that the citizens of a country deserve to know what's going on in that country. So that's where I land, especially also as like a pseudo journalist.
All my cards on the table, I am a Julian Assange fan, so I'll just say that up front. But in general, so the worst thing that they claim that he did is that because there were some unredacted names in the documents, names of people who were basically spying for the U.S., giving them information, they claim that he put their lives in danger by revealing their identity. But the problem with that claim is that they can't point to any examples of anybody actually getting hurt. So there seemingly was no actual consequence. It's just the idea that there could have been a consequence.
Right, but to play devil's advocate, then it's like, well, does that set a precedent now for people to be allowed to release unredacted information? Like, I get that was a problem, kind of an issue, but again, I don't think he deserves 175 years in jail for that. But just playing devil's advocate, like, that is also an issue. Yeah.
It touches the gray area of, like, was there a journalistic benefit of including their names? Because sometimes I imagine to conceal their names would conceal relevant information.
Like the point,
would change the point of why you released it in the first place. I don't know in these specific examples. But before we wrap up, I'll just include, just so people have some context of what the Iraq war logs released, because there's a lot of crazy stuff that was found in those logs that I don't think people realize was released. So I'll give a few examples of what the Iraq war logs revealed, just so people kind of have a little bit more relevant context, since that issue was so many years ago now. So one of the things that those documents revealed was that the U.S. had a torture program on suspected terrorists. And so that was really troubling to a lot of people at the time. It also revealed 15,000 previously unknown civilian deaths. It helped those people be identified. I'll quote this BBC article. So, quote, "One of the WikiLeaks documents shows the U.S. military was given a video apparently showing Iraqi army officers executing a prisoner in the northern town of Tel Afar." So that's one case. Another case, U.S. soldiers suspected army officers of cutting off a detainee's fingers and burning him with acid. There's another incident where an Apache helicopter was shooting at some people that they suspected of firing mortars at a military base in Baghdad. But those two men were actually trying to surrender at the time. And when the soldiers asked the lawyer whether they could accept the surrender, they were told no. And so they went ahead and shot the people who were trying to surrender.
Oof.
And those are just a few examples, so you can see why Chelsea Manning felt the need to release this information because, the U.S. was committing war crimes and basically nobody was hearing about them. And so, in general, it's very telling to me that they bring these charges forward, 10 years later, 12 years later, and especially after he releases more information about, the Democratic Party in a completely separate leak. It's almost like he's alienated all sides of the political spectrum, the political elites in the U.S., both Democrats and Republicans. And so now there's kind of this bipartisan consensus among the establishment that he is a threat to national security and he must be made a lesson of. And, and it's a very divided topic. I tend to think a lot of the public, like you said, kind of how you come at it, they're not necessarily Assange fans of him personally, but they see the value in what he released. That's how a lot of the American people see it. And then there's a lot of government officials who look at it purely through the perspective of he's a national security threat, he must be made a lesson of. So
right.
It'll be interesting to see where the case goes from here. If he gets extradited to the U.S., it'll become a much bigger story because, right now it's just deciding whether England will send him to the U.S. or not.
Oh, I think a judge rejected his bid to delay the extradition.
Well, they haven't
double check that.
It hasn't been finalized yet, as far as I know, because they were still going through the trial earlier today. But they're still going through the extradition trial. And once that's done and he's definitely sent to the U.S. or not, hopefully not, but once he is sent to the U.S., then I think the issue of the free press and the relevance this case has there will definitely pick up steam in the media.
Mm-hmm. So last year in 2019, in the summer, we heard a lot about Neuralink, but recently it has kind of resurfaced in the news again. And Kobe, do you want to tell us why?
Yeah, so last week, Elon Musk held a press conference where they successfully implanted a Neuralink chip into a pig's skull, and they successfully removed it from the pig's skull, and the pig was healthy and fine. So that's why the story is in the news this week. Do you want to explain a little bit more about what Neuralink is?
Yeah, sure. So Neuralink it's not as brand new of a concept as I feel like a lot of people think it is. But basically, so Neuralink would be a series of chips implemented into someone's head. Right now, I think they've done, like you said, they did tests on a pig. I believe they also did some pretty successful tests with monkeys.
And a mouse
but basically
as well.
Yeah, okay, cool. So they're moving along with the test animals. But basically, so the way that it kind of works is that your brain has two cognition systems, one that is emotions, needs, and wants, and one that is your kind of thinking and planning. And his goal with Neuralink is to kind of make that a third system, like a digital intelligence, super intelligence kind of thing, artificial intelligence. And what it involves is this thing called BMI, and it's not body mass index, but BMI in this instance is brain-machine interface. And basically, it's this system that can interpret your neuron pulses, and it interprets them into ones and zeros in order to translate that into that digital language. And that's and the chips that you mentioned, they're called N1 chips. And what they do is they read your brain signals, they amplify, digitize, and process, and then they send them to a device, which is worn behind your ear. It's like a little pod, it's very similar to, I'm not sure what it's called, but there's ear implants, or not ear implants, but like brain head implants that go right behind your ear that are to help with hard of hearing, people who are hard of hearing. Mm-hmm. So this isn't like a brand new thing. And there's also, I believe I want to say MS, but I don't quote me on that. But there's also just like similar technology that's already available, that's already happening. But the difference is that he wants this to be like a control, like you can control your computer or your phone or something with just your brain. So right now the goals of this are kind of medically oriented. So they're for people who have lost motion in limbs. They're for certain diseases, and even to go as far as things as like mental illness and like depression and OCD and anxiety and things like that. Me personally, I think that this is kind of okay for as long as it stays in the realm of medical. Like I said earlier, like this has already been done in terms of like with hard of hearing and I believe MS and all those things. That this isn't brand new, but this level of kind of implementing like AI and things like that, that's what is a little, for me, in my opinion, like scary. Yeah. I totally understand the whole like getting people who are who like need caretakers to be able to kind of fend for themselves and they don't have to rely on those caretakers anymore. I think that's a good goal. But it's just like almost like a slippery slope with like what comes next. Well, yeah. And that's what I'm afraid of.
And it's interesting, too, that you say the word slippery slope, because usually it's a logical fallacy, but in this case, he has explicitly said that once he successfully uses it for cases like Alzheimer's and other, cognitive problems, if that is successful, he then wants to move up just to recreational, full-scale human use. And
that's where I'm like, absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, because of just the way that he talks about it is like a dystopian movie almost, because the reason why he wants to do it that way is because his fear is, and this is a relatively, realistic fear, I think, that AI is developing so quickly that it's going to eventually reach the point where it evolves past humanity. So it becomes so smart that it's smarter than humanity and can outsmart us and potentially, outsurvive us. And so his theory...
Right, like, have you ever watched a sci-fi movie? Like, that's a bad idea.
Oh, yeah. Well, the problem is AI is going ahead whether he does this or not. AI is something that's already happening. I'm sure it already is that smart. Sure. That it's getting close to that smart. But I disagree with him in the sense that, I mean, people already get paranoid about the government trying to implant a chip in your brain and all sorts of other stuff. And this will literally be a chip already implanted in your brain. And we have computer hacking all the time now. I mean, it doesn't seem so far-fetched to imagine that you'll be people hacking, like literally hacking people in their brain. And his argument, I think this was in a Joe Rogan podcast of his, he talked about how, well, technically cell phones already do that because, propaganda and stuff like that, you kind of already do get hacked in your brain. But I don't know, it's really scary to me.
Yeah, but like you can literally always throw your phone away. You can always turn your phone off. You can always choose. You have the choice to like not use that.
I have a feeling that I
said this to you.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I said this to you earlier. I feel like he's very much like, just because I can, I should. And in my brain, I'm like, just because you can, Elon, does not mean that you should. Like, this is not something that I want to see humanity, like, achieve. Like, I'm good with keeping it at the medical level. That's fine. But, like, we do not need to be able to send messages from our brain. Like, that's not, no.
I mean, in general, it kind of fits the general theme of his career that I think he's trying to make. He almost wants to be like an Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, He's the one who made the electric vehicle that helped us transition. He's the one who built the underground tunnels that revolutionized high-speed travel. He's the one who made the computer chip that people implant in their brain. Like, he wants to be the inventor of all the new high-tech futuristic technologies so that he'll be remembered, forever in that type of way.
I feel like he's almost like pushing us towards like the like WALL-E, like the Pixar WALL-E Earth.
Yeah.
Where everything is done for us with our brain, and that's instead of, just existing as a human being.
I was going to say he really is like a modern day supervillain. Like, he reminds me of those like those super rich inventor supervillains that you see in like Marvel movies and stuff. He like fits that like perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. And what I was going to say is, so I just want to put out there, like, plug this video that I watched on YouTube that I actually thought the guy did a really good job of kind of breaking down what Neuralink is, and it helped me understand it as someone who's not very, scientifically versed. And it's called Neuralink, Merging Brain and Machine, and it's by, I believe, the channel Cold Fusion. And they also said that, like what you said, Elon Musk wants to be able to use this for like recreational purposes. And one of the examples that this video said was that, like, let's say you want to travel to a new city and you have a friend who's been there already, you can download that friend's memories so that you have them. And that's not real. Like, even if we can do that, why should we? Like, why should we do that? What is the purpose?
I will admit that there is a tiny part of me that thinks it's just really cool just to imagine the idea that I could, like, Google something in my brain without touching anything, or that I could remember a specific event. The consequences scare me way more than the benefits, but I can see why somebody would be appealed to of the idea of, a cell phone, but all the time in your brain permanently. Like, I mean, we'd have people who are literally like superhuman, like, you know, us doing this podcast right now, we would be researching the things in our head as we're talking, as we're telling the story. We're like a computer. I can imagine a day where, you know, our generation is almost like our parents' generation, in the sense that, like, we're like, oh, these kids these days implanting these chips in their brain. Who do they think they are? You know, they don't even know what it's like to talk to real people in real life. You know, we're going to become those people someday. I really do think that if this becomes successful, I think our kids will probably see whatever benefit there might be of it. Maybe they'll just think that, like Elon Musk said, you need to do it just because, well, half of humanity's already done it. We're going to fall behind. We're going to get killed off. Whatever it is. They're going to have some reason for thinking it's a really good thing. And then we're going to be the older generation who's just like, no, don't do it. It's really dystopian. It's really bad. Don't do it. We'll see who's actually right.
It's like, yeah, I think it's cool. Like, the idea of it is cool and interesting, but like, I just don't see a necessity for it at all. Like, stick to medical, help people learn how to move their body again. I'm all for that. But as soon as it gets to like, oh, Kobe, I'm just gonna send you a picture from my brain of what the smog looked like today in Seattle. Like, no. Like, again, I can just pull it out of my pocket and do it that way, and that's fine. And then then you literally always have the choice to use or not use that type of technology. And I guess you technically have the choice also to like shut off your implant in your brain or get it out. But like what you said, like, when does it become to a point where it's like, well, everyone has one, so it's just easier for me to have one.
Well, and the problem will become like, how can you stay competitive at jobs, or how can you be if half of humanity has it and they're outperforming you, like, you're like, regular humans would become obsolete at a certain point.
Also, is this going to go back to like a poverty thing? Like, are only rich people going to be able to afford Neuralink?
Oh, 100%. I think it is.
Yeah, like, it's just, there's so many issues that go along with it that I just are not worth it. They're not worth it in my eyes.
So I think this is a good opportunity to ask our audience the first question we've ever asked them. What do you think about Neuralink? Would you get Neuralink implanted? Do you think it's a, really bad, like, sci-fi movie, or do you think it's actually going to be like a big step for humanity? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Let us know. So, Juliana, what's your pocket full of sunshine today?
Today, I actually have two again, but they're both a little bit smaller. So this is a little bit old news, I think, but the NBA said that they were going to be using a lot of their arenas as polling places, which I thought was really incredible, especially with, I know it's like in-person voting is still kind of an iffy thing, but at least it provides more opportunities to get people to vote. Yeah,
that'd be like the most spaced out place you could be.
Exactly, and I believe that they would actually really follow and enforce COVID measures. And so my other little story for Pocket Full of Sunshine is more of a heartwarming story, but it definitely holds a little bit of weight for what it means. So basically, lacrosse, if you don't know, is kind of, if you live in the middle of the country or West Coast, you might not be as familiar with lacrosse as you are if you're East Coast, Northeast United States. But lacrosse has kind of slowly been getting bigger and bigger, not just in the country, but kind of across the world. So lacrosse has been trying to enter the Olympics, and in order to do so, they kind of had this little, it's the World Games 2022, and this was kind of going to be their, test run for the Olympics and how that would all work. And they're only taking 8 teams, but they were not allowing the Iroquois Nationals lacrosse team to participate because they are not technically a nation, which, when you think about where lacrosse came from, as in indigenous people of the Americas, they literally invented the sport, and this team was not allowed, or was not going to be allowed to compete.
Yeah, that's so
which
disrespectful.
Is crazy. It's yeah. But what I thought was really amazing is that the Irish national team dropped out in order to give the Iroquois national team their place. And I don't know if it was unanimous, but it was a lot of the team, a lot of the higher ups were they just felt that it was better, and they respect the sport too much to not let it happen. They're you know what? In the long run, this is better for the sport. This is better, just in terms of karma, to not let the inventors, the literal inventors of the sport, participate in this tournament. They didn't want to see that happen. So they dropped out and give them their spot. They are trying to see if they can kind of somehow get a ninth spot, but they're like, if it doesn't happen, it's fine. Like, they wanted to give the Iroquois national team the spot, which I thought that was really incredible. And that's my pocket full of sunshine.
I say, hell yeah, nice to see Western colonists right the wrongs of the past.
Right? Yeah. I just thought it was really cool.
So my pocket full of sunshine this week is about the CDC's eviction moratorium they put in place last week. And so for those who don't know, because of coronavirus, there were up to 40 million American renters who were at risk of eviction before this moratorium was put in place. And so it's really good news that this was put in place because, I mean, it's what day is it now? The 9th of September. It was put in place right around the time that, rent was due for the beginning of September. So we were about to see a lot of people get evicted. And so the one caveat I'll add is that it's not like permanent relief. So people's rent is still piling up. So people who can't afford their rent right now, the problem will become on January 1st when this moratorium is up. They'll owe, 4 more months worth of rent. And if they already were unable to pay for the past few months, it's almost like we have a huge bubble of homelessness that's kind of building up. But
waiting to pop, yeah.
But, pocket full of sunshine. At least we have a moratorium, so it's not an issue that we have to worry about for at least a few more months. So that's really heartwarming to see.
Alrighty, that is all we have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you give it a like. And if you want to hear more from us, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can follow us on our other socials by liking us on Facebook at Back Pocket Report, following us on Instagram at Back Pocket Report, and also on Twitter at BPR News Pod.
Next time you're looking for news, don't forget to check your back pocket.